Have you ever put on some so-called classical music from the 20th century and just thought, what in the world am I listening to? It can sound chaotic or random, even a little unpleasant compared to the beautiful, predictable harmonies of someone like Mozart or Bach. Well, if you've ever felt that way, you're not alone. And we're going to break down exactly why that is.
So let me just kick things off with a kind of a wild question. What if the most powerful, most profound piece of music you ever heard was just pure, absolute silence? Now, that probably sounds completely nuts, right? But that one idea, that single question, really captures the radical, rule-breaking spirit of the entire 20th century.
You see, for hundreds of years, Western music basically followed the same cookbook. There was a clear set of rules for harmony, for melody, for structure. You could almost always feel where the music was going to go next. But right around the turn of the 20th century, composers started to feel like that whole system was, well, exhausted. So they did something that was totally revolutionary. They just threw the entire rulebook right out the window.
And that, as you can imagine, created this huge vacuum. I mean, with no rules, what do you even do? Where do you start? This moment of radical, terrifying freedom basically split the music world in two, sending composers down two fundamentally different and often totally conflicting paths that would define the sound of the next 100 years.
So, what were these two paths? Well, the easiest way to think about it is as this epic philosophical battle. On one side, you had the ideal of total, absolute control. And on the other, total, absolute freedom. And this tension, this tug-of-war between control and freedom, is really the key to understanding everything that comes next. To make sense of this whole conflict, people came up with this really great shorthand, Uptown versus Downtown. The Uptown composers, as you can see here, were the system builders. They were often based in universities, and their answer to having no rules was to create brand new ones, rules that were incredibly complex and academic. And then you had the Downtown composers. These were the questioners, the rebels. Working out of lofts and art galleries, they didn't want new rules. They embraced freedom and started asking these huge fundamental questions about what music even is. Okay, so let's dig into the Uptown camp first. Their goal wasn't just to create chaos, not at all. It was actually to build a completely new, totally logical foundation for music. They figured if the old language of music is dead, well then we just have to invent a new one from scratch. And the most famous of these new systems was Arnold Schoenberg's 12-tone technique. The big idea here was to completely destroy the old hierarchy of notes, where some notes are more important than others. In this system, all 12 notes are created equal. You have to play every single note in a predetermined order before you're allowed to repeat any of them. It was a really rigorous, almost mathematical approach to writing music, the ultimate form of control. And this quote right here, it just perfectly nails the Uptown philosophy. For them, music wasn't just about making you feel something. It was a serious intellectual workout. Complexity wasn't a problem. It was the whole point. It was designed to engage your mind on the deepest possible level. Okay, so now let's pack our bags and head downtown, where the vibe is completely different. If the Uptown composers were like architects building these intricate new structures, the downtown composers were the demolition crew. They weren't interested in inventing a new language for music. They wanted to question the very idea of having a language at all. And this way of thinking led to something we call conceptual music. The key here is that the idea, the thought process behind the piece, is the actual work of art. The sounds you hear, that's just a side effect, a result of the concept. It's a huge shift, right, from creating a beautiful object to presenting a provocative idea. And here's the undisputed king of the downtown scene, John Cage, summing it all up. When he says he doesn't like meaningful sound, he's not saying he hates beautiful things. What he means is that he wants to strip sound of all its historical and emotional baggage. He wants a sound to just be a sound, not a symbol for sadness or joy or anything else. Which brings us right back to our opening question about silence. Cage's most famous, or maybe infamous, piece is called 433. And for 4 minutes and 33 seconds, the performer just sits there, silently. The music is whatever happens in the room during that time. The coughs from the audience, the hum of the lights, the traffic outside. The concept is that music is all around us, all the time. We just have to stop and listen. Now, all of this philosophical fighting between uptown control and downtown freedom had a really amazing practical result. It just blew the doors wide open on what music could actually sound like. All of a sudden, composers had this vast, unexplored territory of pure sound to play with. And this gave them a completely new toolkit. Suddenly, noise wasn't something to avoid. It was a musical ingredient. A tin can or a kitchen whisk could be an instrument. And of course, new technologies were creating sounds that no human had ever even heard before. The possibilities were just endless. So let's talk about noise. For pretty much all of music history, noise was the enemy, right? It was the static you tried to get rid of. But 20th century composers started to see it as just another color in the paint box, something that you could shape and structure and develop just like a beautiful melody. And this idea connects right back to that downtown philosophy of bringing everyday life into art. Composers started using found objects, exploring the unique sounds they could make without trying to force them to sound like a violin. The world itself basically became one giant orchestra. And at the very same time, technology was creating a whole new universe of sound. I mean, from early experiments with tape recorders and loops to the birth of these massive, powerful synthesizers, composers can now sculpt sound in ways that would have been pure science fiction just a generation earlier. Now, one of the most important and popular styles to come out of all this experimentation was minimalism. Instead of that dense uptown complexity, minimalists got obsessed with process. They take a tiny little musical idea and then, through tons of repetition, let it change and evolve very, very slowly over a long time. And the great minimalist pioneer Steve Reich explained it perfectly with this quote. The idea was to create a musical process, set it in motion, and then just get out of the way. The composer builds the machine, but the machine makes the music. It's this amazing blend of Uptown's love of systems and Downtown's hands-off freedom. And finally, the whole idea of what a piece of music even is started to dissolve. Composers started making these huge omni artworks that would combine sound with video, with theater, with visual art, blurring the lines until you weren't just listening to a concert anymore. You were inside a whole sensory experience. Okay, so after a whole century of conflict, of invention, of tearing things down and building them back up, where does that leave us today? What's the legacy of this completely wild period of musical history? I think this quote really gets to the heart of it. That old war between Uptown and Downtown, it's pretty much over. Composers today don't feel like they have to pick a side anymore. Instead, they have the entire 20th century laid out before them like a giant toolkit, and they're free to pick and choose whatever they want. And you can see exactly how this mix and match approach works right here. Take a style like totalism. It combines the super intricate, complex structures that the Uptown school loved with the driving, hypnotic rhythms that came right out of downtown minimalism. Or look at electroacoustic music, which might use incredibly complex digital sound design to manipulate recordings of real-world sounds. The old enemies are now partners in crime. Which leaves us with one last really fascinating question. For the first time in a very long time, there's no one dominant style. There's no single rule book. There isn't even a rule book to rebel against. After 100 years of breaking everything, a composer today has the ultimate freedom, the freedom to use any tool from any era, from any tradition, to build something totally and completely new.